again, and welcome to our third and final video on founder dilution. In this video, we'll continue building on the model that we built out in the second part, so if you haven't already watched that, I'd recommend that you check that out before watching this video. So back to our cold potato example from video 2. We'll start from where we left off last time, after Cold Potato had just completed a $600,000 seed round at a $3 million post-money valuation. So Cold Potato continues to develop its business, and eventually it decides it's time to do a Series A round. Like the seed round, this will be a preferred share financing, and the Series A investors will put up $2 million for a 20% post-closing stake. However, in this financing, the investors want to ensure that there is a 10% pool of unissued options after closing. There are two possible ways of doing this: increasing the stock option pool after the investors come in, a post-closing increase, or increasing the stock option pool before the investors come in, a pre-closing increase. To keep this example simple, we'll just assume that the old 333,000 share option pool has been completely granted to employees. So let's look at the first scenario, a post-closing increase to the stock option pool. Before this financing, there are approximately 4.65 million shares outstanding between the founders, the option pool, the SAFE, and the seed. And with this 4.65 million shares, we can calculate the total shares after the Series A financing, which is just the 4.65 million shares divided by 100% minus the 20% that the Series A will hold after this financing, which gives us 5.81 million shares. From here, we can calculate the number of shares the Series A investors will own after the financing, which we calculate by multiplying the 5.81 million shares by 20%, which gives us approximately 1.16 million shares. Now we'll do the option pool top-up. We'll start by calculating the total shares after the option pool increase, so 5.81 million shares divided by 100% minus the 10% option pool increase, which gives us approximately 6.46 million shares. And now we can calculate the number of shares reserved for the new option pool just by multiplying the 6.46 million shares by 10%, or 646,000 shares. So the fully diluted capitalization after the Series A will be 46.44% for the founders, 5.16% for the original option pool, 6% for the SAFE holders, 14.4% for the seed holders. The Series A investors will fall from 20% down to 18%. And of course, the new option pool will be 10%. Obviously, if you're an investor, this isn't great. You wanted 20% of the company and you've been diluted down immediately to 18%. So how do investors address this? Well, they make the existing shareholders bear the dilution by increasing the option pool before the financing closes. So let's have a look at what that looks like. Unlike in the last example, we can just jump to calculating the total post-financing shares. We know that there are 4.6 million shares outstanding, so we can just divide this by 100% minus 20%, which is the amount that the new Series A investors are going to take, minus 10%, which is the new option pool, which gives us 6.64 million shares. And now we can just calculate the fully diluted ownership percentages, which are 10% for the new option pool, 14% for the seed investors, 5.83% for the SAFE investors, 5.02% for the old option pool, and then for the founders it falls to 45.15%. Now, if you recall from the previous example, the founders actually owned 46.44% if the option pool increase happened after closing, meaning the founders will be diluted by more than 1% if the option pool increase happens before closing. So at this point, you may be thinking, 1%, what's the big deal? Well, that 1% can add up to a 6 or even 7-figure difference on exit. So let's just say an average venture-backed company is sold or undergoes an IPO after a Series C round. If the option pool is topped up after each equity financing and the founders lose an average of 1% each time, that's 3%. In that case, the founders will lose over $1 million on a $35 million sale or IPO. And a successful venture company could sell for a lot more. Okay, so you ask, well, what can I do about it? Well, your investors probably won't let you top up your option pools after a financing, but there are thankfully a few strategies. The first strategy is to negotiate the size of your option pool. Let's go back to our earlier example. If we said the option pool increase was instead of a 10% increase, but an 8% increase, the total shares would actually be exactly the same as if we had done an option pool increase after the closing. So in this case, it would be 4.65 million divided by 100% minus 20% minus the 8% option pool increase, which is equal to 6.46 million shares approximately. And if you run the numbers on that, the founders get 46.44%, the same as if they had done a 10% option pool increase after the financing. So all this to say that the size of the option pool top-up matters, and you should try to come up with an option pool top-up that makes sense for your growth plans and not just accept whatever your investor says is market standard. Second, you should be careful with your option grants. If you burn through your existing option pools, your investors will want to see that pool topped up. So be careful about who gets options and how many. Finally, you should ensure that you have an appropriate vesting schedule in your stock option plan, so that an appropriate number of unvested options are canceled if an employee leaves. This will avoid giving away equity to employees who aren't really contributing that much. All right, so that's it for the examples. Thanks for sticking around. Before we end this, though, I do want to leave you with a few takeaways that should help you manage founder dilution for your company going forward. Which is just to say, think long and hard before you agree to giving away equity to anyone. If you're planning to run a venture-backed company, you will probably lose control of your company at some point. But little promises of equity and convertible financings here and there can diminish your ownership stake much faster than you plan. The second is be careful with convertible securities. As we saw in part 2, convertible securities defer conversations about valuation, which can be helpful when you're raising money at an early stage. But they make it difficult to know how much equity you're giving away. To estimate this, you have to make some assumptions about the valuation of your company in the future, assumptions that may not always be accurate. The third is pay attention to option pool top-ups. As we saw in this video, an overly large option pool increase will result in an additional founder dilution, and you should ensure that any option pool top-up you negotiate is appropriately sized for your company's growth objectives. And the fourth and final takeaway, which is admittedly self-serving, is to get help. The examples we've used in this video are about as simple as it gets when you're talking about venture-backed companies. The modeling gets much more complicated if you are using convertible securities that have a valuation cap, or if you end up doing multiple rounds of convertible security financings. Building a good model early can save you a lot of heartache and money in the future. If you don't want to build it yourself, there are online cap table services like Carta that offer built-in modeling tools, but just a word of warning there. These modeling tools are usually premium features that you'll pay more for. Talking to an experienced lawyer or financial advisor is also a good idea. They can usually help review your cap table and your assumptions and advise on potential pitfalls. I'll leave you with a pitch for our Founders series. We cover founder dilution and much more in a number of chapters there. In particular, I'd suggest checking out Founder Shares 101 and Venture Finance 101, both of which go into further detail about founder dilution and some of the deal dynamics you should expect when you're doing a venture financing. So we're finally at the end of this very lengthy discussion of founder dilution. Thanks so much for your attention, and I hope you found it useful.